Hi everyone, just a short video on the topic of converted, so-called converted perfect verbs. This has to do with the tense value of perfect verbs. And it's a little confusing in some sense, but also I noticed most of you on your translation projects that ran into these types of verbs, they didn't really phase you at all. And that's usually the case with students, that they don't usually get too worked up about them, but it's good to kind of just briefly review how linguists think about the perfect verbs. So usually the typical tense value of a perfect verb is simple past tense, so was something, he ran, he jumped, he sat, and so forth. It can also be past perfect, so he has built the temple, he has called the people, she has sounded the alarm, something like that. So the idea of past perfect. And again, there's no separate verb for doing this in Biblical Hebrew. Sometimes present tense. So we've looked at a few cases where the perfect can be present in Genesis. However, there are times where the perfect requires a translation of future tense, or a what we call modal tense, like should, would, could, should do this, could do this, would do this, particularly if the future is preceded by a vav. And sometimes if you look at other Hebrew textbooks, the author or the linguist will call this a converted perfect. And this language came in, I don't know, I think it was a way to try to help students understand the verbs, and some people find it more confusing than helpful. So if we think of the perfect form of the verbs, in other words, the suffix form of the verbs, as past tense, which is already kind of problematic because we have all these other options. But if we think of them as like, okay, they're past tense, but we have these other exceptions where they're not past tense. When they're preceded by a vav, they're future tense. So they came to be called converted because the vav was sort of seen as converting them from past to future. I don't know, this works for some people and not for others. In the same way with the vav consecutive, we said the vav consecutive precedes a verb that looks an awful lot like the imperfect. It really precedes a form that is a form of the jussive, but jussives and imperfects are exactly the same in most cases. So it looks like in the case of the vav consecutive that the vav was converting an imperfect verb to, which is normally future, to past tense. There's all kinds of more technical linguistic reasons why that's kind of not true, but this was an instructive method used for a long time just to sort of, I don't know, help people understand what tense they should use, I guess. So I tried not to lie to you about this, um, but if it works for you, I'm more than happy for you to use it. So let's look at an example of this and see what I'm talking about. So there's a verse from Genesis 3. So we've worked some on Genesis 3. It's a story of Adam and Eve and eating the fruit, etc. So this is Genesis 3:22. And we begin with Vayomer, which I hope you all know by now means and he said. So this is a past tense verb, and the vav consecutive is virtually always past tense. It's like the purest form of past tense that we have in Biblical Hebrew. So, and he said, that is Yahweh Elohim, the Lord God. So what did the Lord God say? Hain, which is like hine, like behold or look or hey, take notice. So look, ha'adam, the man, haya. So haya is a perfect verb, meaning to be or become. So here it's a perfect verb, and we would our first go-to tense is past tense, and that works perfectly well here. So ha-adam haya, the man has become. So thinking of it in the past tense, so even in the past perfect, has become ka ahad mimenu. So this means like one of us, one from us, one of us. So achad, remember Adonai echad, so this is one of, so like one of us. So hey, the man has become like one of us. Then we have a nice infinitive construct here, so this comes from yada, to know. So we said that infinitive construct either can go two different directions, to know or knowing, probably knowing, adding an ing is a good option here. So the man has become like one of us, knowing tov vara, knowing good and evil. So hopefully the tenses make sense so far. Now it gets a little trickier, but I think it's not really, it's fairly intuitive. It's kind of just when you start thinking about it that you maybe get in a little trouble. So va'ata, so and now, and then we have this word pen, which means lest, and then we have an imperfect verb, yishlach. So shin lamed chet means to stretch out or throw or put out. So we would translate this, lest he will put out, or lest he will stretch out, or lest he should stretch out. So it's sort of future or modal here, and which is our normal way we translate imperfect verbs. So lest he should stretch out, yado, his hand. Now here's where the tricky part comes. So v'lakach. So lakach means to take. And we would expect, because this is a perfect verb, so there's no suffixes, our go-to would be past tense. But here it makes more sense to continue the phrase in the modal or future sense. So let's think about this. Let's go back. So lest he should stretch out his hand, and he should take. Makes more sense than and he took. So we're worried about what could happen in the future, not about what's already happened. So here we have a perfect verb which makes a lot more sense translated in the future tense than in the past tense. And it's preceded by a vav with a schwa. So that is what some people call a converted imperfect, meaning that it's a perfect verb, but it's best translated in the future or modal tense. Now, the reason, though, that I think it should be translated as future is not so much because of the form, but because we've sort of started off our sentence in that mode. So Yahweh is talking about what could happen in the future. So we're already kind of thinking in that way, thinking about what might happen in the future. So that the tone is set by the imperfect at the beginning of the sentence, and this, wrong way, and this v'lakach, so the va here just sort of continues, just tacks on to this tense that we're already thinking about. Whatever kind of helps you the most here, but just know that when you have this vav plus a perfect, it can be translated as future. So in some sense, future is, or I'm sorry, in some sense, perfect is sort of the most annoying verb in terms of tense, because it really can be all over the map, and you have to think about the context and where this verb sits in the sentence to figure out what the correct tense should be. So lest he should stretch out his hand, and he should take, gam, also may aids from the tree, chachaim, the tree of life. And then we have another vav plus a perfect verb, va'achal. So hopefully you remember achal means to eat. So lest he should take and lest he should eat, v'hai, so actually the hay has dropped off here. So, and live, lest he should take and lest he should eat and lest he should live, la'olam, forever. So I just wanted to point out here kind of a concrete illustration of where a perfect verb could take on a future meaning. Now, if we go all the way back to the Vayomer, this is kind of setting the tone for the whole sentence. So God said, and we the reader are thinking about, this is something God said in the past. So the overall tone of the verse is a scene set in the past. But in the past, Yahweh talks about what might happen in the future when Yahweh is speaking. So biblical Hebrew has different ways. This is probably the most common way of doing that. So the language is able to accommodate a scene in the past where they talk about their future. And this is one of the ways that they do it, using an imperfect followed by this quote unquote converted perfect. Again, if you just kind of go with your gut and go with the flow of the tense that's already started in the verse, most often people have no problem. But it's when they start thinking about a verb like this and they say, well, that's perfect. Shouldn't that be past tense? That's when people get into a little bit of trouble sometimes. Thinking too much. Sometimes you can think too much in biblical Hebrew. Anyway, just that short note on the converted perfect. Hope that makes sense to you. Take care.